time to shuffle up. With Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan, let's fill our cups. Commander decks in hand, the battle's about to start. A podcast for the legends, where magic meets the heart. Commander's Pod, where the stories unfold. With heroes and villains, new and old. Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan guide the way. In the world of EDH we play.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Commander's Pod. My name's Duncan. I'm joined by Sloan.
Hello.
And we have a special guest today. We have the infamous Andrew.
Infamous indeed.
So Jeff is on vacation at Disney. So he will not be with us for the next couple of episodes. So Andrew has agreed to fill in, despite us prompting all of you to kill him first.
This is normal. If you can't handle the table arc enemying you every game, are you really playing Magic?
I guess that's a fair question to ask.
Right. But we have some cool stuff to talk about. Andrew, why don't you first talk a little bit about your history with Magic, like where you started, your kind of journey?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. My Magic journey goes back nearly to the beginning. I missed out on the really old sets, the alphas and the betas, and the first few expansions like the Dark and Arabian Nights. My first entry into Magic was Christmas of '95. We were taking a break over the Christmas break, playing some Dungeons and Dragons, but one of the players in our group couldn't make it. So my brother had been down to the local hobby store, searching for new modules for us to play, and stumbled across this new product called Magic the Gathering. I believe it was in its Ice Age expansion at that point, so he picked up a couple of boxes for each of us and brought that home as early Christmas presents. We spent the whole break playing it exhaustively, and we were pretty much hooked by New Year's.
Nice.
Very cool.
And so have you played steadily, or did you take a break anywhere in there?
I did play steadily, but I have also taken an extended break. I believe it was around Onslaught block. Life just got a little too busy with college and whatnot, and I had to step away from the game. I returned around Rise of the Eldrazi, and I've been playing steadily ever since.
So how long was that period?
Oh, let's see. Onslaught would have been, 2002 or 3? Rise of the Eldrazi, I think, was around 2010.
Okay, so 6-7 years, somewhere in that range.
Something to that effect.
And
Don't quote me on that.
when did you pick up Commander?
I was actually a fairly late entry into Commander. My play group was mostly 60-card casual multiplayer back in those days. And this new format, Commander, I heard about it and saw people playing it long before I got my own deck. My collection had been pretty exhaustively optimized for 4 of formats at that point. And so it took quite a while for me to warm up to the idea of singleton. But once I realized that playing this new format allowed me to utilize a lot of the interesting and splashy cards that had just gathered dust in my trade binders for years, that was kind of the tipping point. My first Commander deck was a personal construction using what I had at the time. I believe I made Sisay Weatherlight Captain. Original Captain Sisay.
Right.
And like I said, just the things I had at the time, what are my best legends? Throw them in there, see what happens.
Right.
For sure.
And a few years later, and now he is the evil arch enemy of every game.
Well, yeah. That kind of came about just because as one of the more technical players at most of the tables that I play at, being able to lend my threat detection to less experienced players was pretty valuable early on, and so I got this reputation as a chocolatey velvet voice that could charm virtually anyone into doing my bidding.
And let's not forget, every deck you touch is CEDH.
Right, apparently.
You've got to be able to pilot that complexity to the greatest extent possible.
But So we normally do a Tales from the Table here. We talk about a game, but we were talking about, you were going to talk about kind of the days of old.
Ah, yes. The halcyon days of my youth. Back when I was an old walker, using the most meager of resources to conquer my foes. Unstably mutated Zephyr Falcons and spirit-linked Sarah Angels, the occasional Mahamati Jin. Ah, yes. Flying damage. Good old classic evasion. And, of course, control shells.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think half of those cards you just said, most people don't even know what they are because they're things like you said, they've just gone by the wayside.
Yeah, poor Sarah Angel was at one point the face of the game, but now she's been power crept so hard that you'd never see her played almost anywhere.
Right. No, but there is still, I mean, we've talked about it. EDH is where she does live because there is the lower level, what I call the true like Elder Dragon Highlander group of players who like the old power level of just beat each other up and slow churning games and no fast mana and just kind of have at it.
Probably no tutors, probably mostly basic mana, those kind of
Yes, the true spirit of Elder Dragon Highlander, as Sheldon Menery, may he rest in peace, would have intended.
Right. I've talked about, in my opinion, there's really 3 games that they call EDH. And it's,
Right.
I call the old decks are kind of the EDH, like the ones that think Soul Ring should be banned and things like that. And then there's Commander, and then there's CEDH. So to me, like it's almost 3 different games because Commander's more the level we play. It's a much higher level than that the EDH, Elder Dragon Highlander, the ones that really want that low power level.
Commander is the format we play. I have you speak for yourself, sir.
What do you play? CEDH?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah.
The principles of CEDH apply down the scale.
Yeah.
But even if you're not running all of the staples of the format, the ideas of how decks are constructed bleeds into even a lower constructed deck. I would actually make that that distinction. I agree with you on the multiple formats kind of all masquerading as one overarching theme. I would typically call it something like Battle Cruiser Magic
Right.
versus Commander mainstream versus no holds barred CEDH.
Right. Yeah. I just think that the reason I say that they're the true EDH players, we did an episode, the whole thing was about have we strayed from what EDH was supposed to be? And if you look at how it started, we have. Like we are so far removed from the power level that it was originally meant to be with having only the Elder Dragons as the commanders and they all cost ridiculous amounts of mana and we didn't have half of the ramp and mana rocks we have now in those decks.
I'll absolutely applaud Wizards of the Coast, though, for their precons keeping up with the something approximating the average power level of a mainstream commander
I
deck.
think they did hiccup for a little bit. They did
Yes.
take a second to catch up, but now they're kind of keeping up with it.
I would say that their precons for Commander have kind of gone up and down. Like
Yeah.
they were good, and then like they got like too good, so then they went like way back down, and then they got good again. Like we make jokes all the time because when we played the MH3 precons with Jeff, we're like these were like the only one in my opinion that I've seen function at a high consistent level was
Out
the
of the
energy
box.
out of the box was the energy one. Like I played it, like we played it I think twice in one night, and it did great both times. Like it did exactly what it's supposed to do. The Eldrazi one was like hit or miss. Like you had to kind of get the right stuff to make it worthwhile. And then the other two, the Termagoyf one is just in my
Graveyard Overdrive.
it just was.
Yes.
I was like, this is not like I could not hit any cards that were of any importance to the other cards I had constantly, and it was like, why is like nothing?
It's
in
not
this
as
deck.
consistent.
It's like
it's an okay deck.
The other ones just weren't as consistent. Like you weren't getting the consistency.
I felt like the everything tokens one, it was a one-trick pony out of the box.
It had a very high skill ceiling, and I really enjoyed it. The problem I always had with the deck is, okay, so you're using all of these search methods to get out these land synergy combos. what are you doing with
Right,
all
that's
that
my
Right,
point.
and that's
you got
what's
you
the
can
end
I
game?
can make 13 mana or some ridiculous thing.
and do
what am I going to
nothing
do
with it. Right. And so the whole point was we were
52 mana on turn 4.
But was that out of the box or you're modified?
I think that was out of the box because it came with a doubling season
Yeah.
in the base deck.
Right.
And I managed to power that thing out super early because I had a nut hand. And I'm sitting here going, I have this absolutely absurd amount of mana, and there's nothing in my hand, and there's no activated abilities on the
Right.
battlefield. I'm just, okay, well, 52 mana potential going to waste.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was our argument, was that set of decks was not even for sure. And while that could do ridiculous things with mana, you had nothing to do with it.
right. And then literally right before that, they came out with Thunder Junction, where all 4 of the decks were really well made. Like they were all pretty consistent in regards to what they were able to do. Their themes were on point. Like they all played well right out of the box.
And I think then after that too with Bloomburrow, same thing. I think all 4 decks played pretty well out of the box and were very consistent.
And and you could tell like the theme was even well done. Like this is the theme, and you're able to kind of keep doing it throughout the entirety of the game. And we were, and so like Jeff, of course, staunchly disagrees with us. He's like, no, the MH3 decks were great. We're like, you're just trying to convince yourself that you didn't make a bad investment. Like, don't put that evil on us, Ricky Bobby. So
I liked the MH3 precons in theory.
Right. Theoretically. Or as something to build off of.
Yeah, the themes were interesting, and like I said, there was some serious combo potential in that Eldrazi deck. I think it was Eldrazi Incursion.
yeah, it was what it was called, I think.
Yeah, there's the potential, I think, for an infinite combo relatively easily, either with the base deck or with a very minor modification.
The energy deck did have a infinite combo built in.
Right.
Yeah.
These, like, the problem with the Eldrazi deck is just the conceit of the deck, the high mana value creatures, the 5 colorless nature of it. Just there's not a good way to smooth the amount of disruption that all of what you're doing is. And it had a great mana base. I love the fact that it had all 10 of the pain lands in that Eldrazi deck. That was good times. But in the end, while it could do some pretty interesting things when you upgraded it, out of the box, it was kind of
It was lackluster.
do not a lot, scare the table senseless,
Become arch enemy.
yes, and get the crap beat out of you because you don't have the tools to defend yourself.
Right. So kind of how Andrew feels every game. Except for the part about not being able to defend yourself. He does play
that's
well
just
for
a
us,
lie.
let's be honest.
So,
Don't let him fool you.
I'm fully harmless. There's no need for you to attack me. Clearly, I'm not about to win next turn.
right.
And then he wins next turn.
Exactly.
But normally here we would do aggro Jeff, or what I'm going to start calling is Jeff's triggers.
Right.
The things that trigger him. But Andrew, what triggers you?
I put some thought into this, and I think the thing that bothers me that I commonly encounter is people not being explicit enough in their technical plays. One of the things that causes arguments at the table is people not identifying the cards they're playing as they play them. Things like, I make my land play for the turn. Okay, what land did you just play? There's a world of difference between how I'm going to respond to a basic forest versus a Maze of Ith versus a Gaia's Cradle.
Right.
I kind of need to know what your potential threat you're showing is. And when you don't name the cards you're playing, I can't feel like I'm playing a strategy game anymore. Now I'm playing some sort of gambler's cups and balls. And between people not explicitly passing priority, people not naming the cards they're casting or the land they're playing, I just wish everyone would be a little bit more verbal about what they're doing, because we get into these pods that sometimes exceed 5 players, and sometimes it's hard to see what's on other people's board, especially when they're stacking land in non-obvious ways.
And they have so many versions of cards now. They're not always instantly recognizable.
Yeah,
right.
Between secret lair versions that are unrecognizable at a glance, to the prevalence of proxies.
Yeah.
The skinning that everyone enjoys with alters. You remember those when people used to paint on cards?
Yeah, they still do.
Yep.
I still see them.
So, yeah. In all of these ways, it makes the game more difficult to follow in a format that's already got a complexity off the charts. And I just feel like we need to acknowledge that it's difficult to follow a high-power Commander game and hit all those triggers, find all of those replacement effects, and just generally play the game as it should have. Misplays make people upset, and they ruin people's nights.
Right. And it really... I've been in games where somebody goes to do something and something somebody had out 3 turns ago, they didn't realize they had it. You know, and if it's because the person who put it out didn't say what they're putting out, that's definitely a sticky situation and one that's no fun for anybody.
And optimally, everyone would have a pod that's understanding enough to go, okay, we understand that you didn't realize that was there. This is an obviously bad play. Go ahead and pick that back
Right.
up.
But sometimes whatever that thing was may have totally changed the game for somebody and they don't realize it until
Or just
2 turns
tipping
later.
your hand that you have that thing may completely throw the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and there's always, like, a lot of people don't have the luxury of a home play group of friends who are understanding in that way.
Right.
A lot of people just go to their local shop and whoever shows up, those are their opponents for the night. We really should all try harder to make sure that we make this as enjoyable an experience for everyone, including ourselves, by just being explicit about what we're doing, so this can remain more of a strategy exercise and less of a gotcha.
Well, and the other thing too, people will get salty about you asking them to do that sometimes. Right. And then they'll start doing the ridiculous things like passing priority at every opportunity to pass priority.
I
You know what
play
I
a
mean?
land, I pass priority.
Yeah.
I tap my land, I pass priority. I
You
cast
can't-
my spell.
That's not a priority passing activity.
They're doing it anyways.
I'm just saying.
Like,
Yes,
yeah, I get that. Like,
totally.
they will get salty. And like one of the things that kind of, I'll piggyback off of that for me is, for someone who does try to explicitly say what I'm playing all the time and make sure I state all the time what the cards are, then when people make plays and I'm like, oh, that doesn't work like that because I have this out, they're like, oh, I'm not going to do it. I was like, I've said it every single turn and I've talked about it every time and I've made sure I've stated it and I put it somewhere where you can see it. And then now you're going to undo. Like, to me, that's frustrating for me as a person who's trying to do what you're saying we should do. And at that point, it's like, especially if it's someone who knows how to play, someone who's more experienced. If it's a new player,
Ostensibly.
if it's a new player, again, obviously I'll be more I'll be very generous with them and I'll help
Right.
explain why it doesn't work that way, obviously, because like you said, we want people to love this game and come play with us and expand this
Yes.
game. But when you're playing with people who should know what happens and you're stating things and you're putting things out there and then they do all this stuff and you're like, okay, well, that doesn't work. And they're like, oh, well, I'm going to undo this then. I'm going to undo everything I just did because that's why. It's like, well, that's not, you can't do that. Like, come on, man. Like,
There's a limit to the number of takesies, backsies that you can take before it's reasonable to be frustrated with a player who's not giving it their full attention.
right. For sure. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a two-sided coin too. I think, not having people state the stuff is frustrating, but then being the person who states stuff and then not people paying attention is also very frustrating.
Yeah.
It's definitely, it goes back and forth for sure.
The double-sided benefit and pain of having cell phones at the game.
Right.
Completely different topic.
or TVs in this shop, as I
Yes.
know Andrew has been sucked into many a time.
He's fallen victim to a couple of times.
I love that show.
Yeah. Right. So, but that was a good one.
That's when you got Andrew on the ropes. All you gotta do if you're
Make sure
losing,
you have him facing the TV.
If you're losing, ask him to put on a show you know he likes or a movie you know he likes, and he'll miss his triggers like everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell them about my kryptonite.
But so I definitely agree with that trigger. And I appreciate that it's magic themed, unlike many of Jeff's. So thank you for that.
Right.
So we're going to move on to That Doesn't Do What You Think It Does. And I'm very excited about this one because it's something I love to play.
Right.
And I think many people don't realize its intricacies. And
Right.
that's playing clones and clone effects. So this is going to answer questions like how do clones work? What are some of the intricacies about them? How are they affected by certain cards that may be counterintuitive? So Andrew, many of you may not know. In fact, most of you may not know. I think we mentioned it maybe once. But Andrew actually was an officially licensed judge at one point.
Yes, and then COVID hit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pretty much
unfortunately.
right after, right?
Yeah, pretty much immediately after. Like it was right on the cusp of COVID. Got my official certification, and then there weren't anything to judge.
And then by the time it came back around, there were no
The judging
system
program
had
had
been-
completely changed.
Yeah. But Andrew is really knowledgeable, and he did a lot of research for this, even though he knew a lot to begin with. So why don't you tell us about some of this clone data? Well, attack of the clones, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the obvious things about clones. Like everybody generally knows how clones work, that there's copyable characteristics, and not everything is a copyable characteristic, but not a lot of people know exactly what a copyable characteristic is.
Right.
The main ones, of course, power and toughness, name of the card, types and subtypes,
Color.
rules text, color, yes. These, like pretty much anybody who's experienced a clone knows roughly how that works. But you get into some really strange situations when you start throwing obscure card types at it. Things like face down morphs, things like flipped Kamigawa cards, things like dual faced cards. All of these get really weird for a while, like when you start stacking them up.
Well, before we talk about that, let's talk about the fact that I've seen this gotten wrong many times. Most clones are not enter the battlefield effects, correct? They cannot be responded to as an effect once the creature has been successfully cast and enters.
So when you talk about the card clone, the template for which most clones operate, when you speak about this type of effect, its enter's ability is a replacement effect rather than a trigger, and it is a non-targeted effect. Therefore, the first time you will know what your opponent is cloning specifically will be when it has already entered the battlefield.
Right,
And
which
hence
is important.
Already entered as that thing, like in this case of
Exactly.
Right,
Dockside.
because this is kind of goes back to priority, which we talked about also a couple episodes ago, where when you cast that card, as you mentioned, because it's an non-targeted as it enters the battlefield, sometimes you don't have to name what you're cloning until it has been successfully cast. So you can say, I'm attempting to cast Clone, which is a classic clone card, just called
Right.
Clone. You don't have to name anything because it is not until it enters, then you, like you mentioned, then it has
the replacement
the
effect.
replacement effect
Right.
happen. So that's one thing that a lot of people get wrong is they'll go and cast it and name what they're copying.
Right. You are volunteering information that is not necessary.
Correct.
That's what we have a term for that. We say don't yield your right away. Don't give up information you do not need
Right.
to. Don't jump ahead in priority is another way of yielding your right away.
Yeah.
You
So
know?
and that's really important to distinguish because that's a mistake. That's the most common one I see people make.
Right. So I just wanted to start with that one because I think that's one that is the most common situation that comes up that people get wrong. But then, as you were talking about copying things that are flipped or modal, so
I actually put together a little quiz for you guys.
oh boy,
Oh,
Are you ready to have your knowledge of clones tested?
I'm ready. I don't know about Sloan.
I was born breech, so no.
Okay. So, first question. I'll start with the easier ones and we'll work our way up to the more challenging ones.
All right, that's fair.
Okay. True or false? Your opponent casts the spell Clone and passes priority. The only creature on the battlefield is your Dockside Extortionist. You can give Dockside Shroud in response. If you do this, this forces the clone to enter as a 0/0 creature since it has no legal target.
That is
False.
false because that does not target.
It does not target. It just enters as a version of it.
Yeah.
Well done. So yes, As we've just discussed, clones don't target. Shroud only prevents it from being targeted by anyone. So yes, a creature with Shroud is a legal target for, well, a legal choice for the clone.
Correct,
When
yeah.
it enters the battlefield. So yeah, if you have your opponent make this mistake, make sure to smile wickedly at them as you choose their creature anyway.
Right.
So
Unless they're new.
unless they're new, in which case comfort them as you stomp them.
Yes. Then you should have a little bit of feels bad.
Right. Question number 2. You cast the spell Clone. When is the last chance your opponents have to respond before you choose what creature the clone will become?
Unless something else happens, there is only one chance, and that's in response to once priority is passed, once the spell has been cast.
Yeah, once every player has passed priority, there is no longer a chance to respond to the cast of the spell, but you can target it once it's hit the field.
Right,
Correct.
but the ETB would already have.
Correct. It would already have made it. It would already come in as whatever version it is. So, like for example, Dockside that you just said,
Yep.
he would have already gotten the treasures, but you can
Well,
still
they'd be on
blow
the
it up.
stack. You could stifle that.
Yes,
but-
the trigger will
Yeah, that
will be
trigger would
put on
then
the stack.
Yeah.
be put
So
on the stack.
yes, exactly so. The last opportunity to respond to a clone before the choice is made is before the clone resolves. That round of priority immediately before clone resolves. So yes, that is exactly
You cannot even stifle a clone's cloning.
correct. Stifle only is able to target activated and triggered abilities. The clone's choice is a replacement effect, therefore not a legal target for that card.
Right. And this goes back to that first thing that I wanted to talk about first. So many people, like even though that you tell them this is not an ETB, it is not a triggered effect, these type of things, they'll still think that things that say ETBs don't happen will stop it. And it's like, no.
The funny thing is, it should be intuitive that way, because if the clone's enter ability was an ETB and not a replacement effect, it would enter as a 0/0 creature, immediately die to state-based effects before its trigger could resolve.
Right. But some clones, to be fair, do have a power and toughness written on the card.
Sakashima the Imposter among them, it being a 3/1 in its base form.
Right.
Right.
Okay. On with your quiz.
Right. So your opponent casts Clone. You have a murder in hand and the resources to cast it. The only creature on the battlefield is the Dockside Extortionist. You can murder the Dockside in response to the Clone spell, and assuming there are no creatures on the battlefield when Clone resolves, it must enter as a 0/0. True or false?
You're talking about true clone.
I'm
true
talking
clone.
about the spell Clone.
Yes. So
yeah,
true.
I would say that's true because if you kill the Dockside before priority has resolved, then yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Gosh,
The
I wish
clone-
all my quizzes in school were like this. I'm nailing this right now.
If the clone's controller has no legal choices for clone's replacement effects, it must enter in its based form. This is usually fatal, but very much fun to watch.
Right. And that's like you just said, Sakashima, that's where he kind of gets around that because it's like, okay, his base form's a 3/1. So he would survive a Dockside being blown up because he does have a power and toughness greater than toughness specifically greater than 0.
Right. You'll also run into this situation sometimes when a clone comes back from a living death. Creatures that enter simultaneous to clones are not legal targets for their choice.
Oh, okay. So like a recursion.
Yeah.
If you recur everything and
Specifically when the clone and another creature enter simultaneously, then the other creatures entering with the clone are not viable choices.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say something, but I lost it.
Okay. Question 4. True or false? An object already on the battlefield becoming a copy of another object triggers the enters ability of the object copied.
so all right, hold on. Say it again slowly. So
An object already on the battlefield
all right.
becoming a copy of another object triggers the enters abilities
no.
of the object copied.
No.
False.
Yeah, that's false because the enters trigger is not happening because it's just becoming a copy of it. The classic example is Mirage Mirror, I think it is, the artifact.
Yep.
Yeah, you pay
That
3,
was-
becomes a copy of artifact, enchantment, creature,
Or land.
land. I thought it was land. I was hesitant.
Yeah,
I don't want to get it wrong in
dark
front of
depths,
Andrew.
dark depths and a mirage mirror, real good.
Gaia's Cradle and a Mirage Mirror real good too.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but
Two mana gets you potentially who knows how many.
I remembered what I was going to say about the last one. He could have thrown us off by doing a trick question where he used a black card that happened to not be an instant, happened to be a sorcery, and gotten us that way. I'm glad
I've
you didn't
tried
do that.
not to do that sort of shenanigans.
But
in
we
this
would have
case.
fallen for that 100%.
Well, I know murder's an instant.
Yeah, I do too.
I know for
but
a
he could
fact,
have
but
choose-
yeah,
there's
you
a
would've-
bunch of sorcery black.
Yeah, what is it? Feed the swarm.
Yeah.
I always forget there's a freaking sorcery.
Right?
Yeah, I
I'm
always
not,
forget that. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna feed this. I'm like, nope, never mind. I'm not gonna cheat. Sorry, my bad. Go on.
not that cruel. But yes, in answer to the question, you were both correct. An object that becomes a copy while entering also gains and triggers the enter abilities of the object copied, but an object on the battlefield does not do so when it gains the copyable characteristics of another object, because obviously it didn't enter the battlefield. Even though it became something else, it didn't enter as something else.
Right, and that same rule applies to. I know we're talking about clones, but take control cards. It's the same
Yes.
exact thing, and that's a question that almost every game someone will ask if someone's taking control of something.
Yes.
Does this trigger this? Nope, it never left the field. It's just changing sides while maintaining on the field.
Unless it says exile the creature, return it to the battlefield under your control.
Correct.
Which is what I was about to say. Yes, for an example of cards that repeatedly leave the battlefield, then re-enter as a copy, see things like Estrid's Evocation.
Yep.
Yeah, because that has special text that says at the beginning of each upkeep, it leaves the battlefield to exile, comes back as a copy of something else. So repeatedly triggers the ETB.
Right. Yeah.
Yep, or sorry, the E.
Yeah. The enter.
There's no TV.
So next question, true or false? When your clone enters, you choose an animated Blink Moth Nexus with a 1/1 counter on it that was, earlier that turn, the target of giant growth. Your cloned Blink Moth Nexus will also be a creature. Enter with a 1/1 counter and get the +3/+3 until end of turn.
I'm going to say false.
I'm gonna say false because I think it only cares about the physical card
But
itself.
much
is my
less
reasoning.
confidently, I
But-
might point out.
No,
Yeah.
you're both absolutely correct. That is false. All of those are examples of effects that are not copyable. So anything from damage to type changes, basically anything other than a clone effect on the source card is not copied over by the new clone. If you were to target that animated enhanced Blink Moth Nexus that I just used as the example, you would get an unanimated version of the Blink Moth Nexus.
Right.
Now, that also holds true if a creature is equipped and it says this creature gains. Is that not correct?
Yes, because like if you're talking about equipment, that's a continuous ability the equipment is giving to the creature. The clone would not have those abilities unless there's some strange circumstance where the equipment actually had it enter with those abilities or something. There may be an example of that I'm not familiar with.
Right.
But yes, in the general term, things like equipment, things like crewing, things like animating manlands, things like type changes. Some planeswalkers can become creatures.
Right.
Some enchantments animate land that are not normally animated. None of that stuff applies. Basically, whatever the card is printed as, unless it's become a copy of something else, that's what you're getting. Even like I said, if it's clone and the thing is just temporarily a creature, say you have March of the Machines in play, and you have an artifact on the battlefield that's been animated by it. March of the Machines, of course, is an enchantment that animates all artifacts to have power and toughness equal to their mana value.
Right.
If you target an animated artifact from that effect with a clone, it's going to come in as a base copy of that artifact, and then March of the Machines will animate it too, of course. But if later on March of the Machines is removed from the battlefield, you're just going to have a base copy of that artifact.
Right.
All right. So, true or false? You choose your opponent's Mirage Mirror for your Phyrexian Metamorph, while Mirror was not copying any other object. Later, your opponent activates Mirror's ability and chooses your Dockside Extortionist. His Mirror ability resolves, and Mirror becomes a Dockside that knows the true meaning of poverty, not getting any treasures. Your metamorph also becomes a broke dockside extortionist since it's copying that mirror.
False.
False.
Yes. So the clone ability snapshots the permanent at the time the clone ability resolves. So if the if you have a Phyrexian metamorph enter as a mirage mirror that hasn't yet done its ability to copy anything that round, your Phyrexian metamorph will also be a mirror. If the mirror later becomes something else, yours is unaffected.
Right.
It was set at the time it was copied.
Right.
That's the issue that we were getting at there, and you both knocked it out of the park. So let's move up to slightly harder questions.
Oh boy.
So
I thought those were getting harder already.
No, that one was pretty easy, I thought. Anyway.
true or false? Your clone spell resolves. You choose your opponent's Night Eyes the Desecrator, the flipped side of a Nizumi Grave Robber, a Kamigawa flip card. Your clone will enter as Night Eyes the Desecrator.
False.
False. Yeah.
Yes. That is the correct answer. Flipped and unflipped is considered a card status, and card statuses are not a copyable characteristic. Therefore, the clone that normally enters unflipped because it's not a Kamigawa flip card will come in as the Nizumi Grave Robber, the unflipped side. Your Rat Rogue will have to learn wizardry the hard way.
Gotcha.
All right. Next, true or false? Your clone spell resolves, and when it enters, and you choose your opponent's clone, which itself had chosen a soul ring last turn that was, at the time, animated by Karn Silver Golem's ability. Your clone enters as a soul ring just like his.
False.
Yeah, false. I would say false.
Correct.
Okay.
Your opponent's soul ring copy was not a creature on the battlefield when your clone entered, so it could not be chosen.
Yeah,
it's not.
because all that would happen is you're cloning the clone, which his ability says you can.
Well, actually, you would have to choose something else.
You have to choose something else completely
Because when your
it's
clone
not technically
tries to enter, their clone, which you were trying to choose in this example, was not a creature, therefore not a legal target for the clone's replacement.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I didn't think.
Yeah,
about that
because
part of it.
seeing that's where I almost got cut up was because the card obviously is still cloned, so it says clone there, but it's like you said, snapshotting what it's copying, and it's kind of just laying it over it. So in
Right.
reality, it's an artifact, unless it was an animated artifact.
At the time, in that example, the Karn Silver Golem had animated it into a 1/1 creature. However, this is on a different turn.
So
according to
therefore,
the
it's no
example.
longer a creature.
It's not a creature at that time. Therefore, even though the card itself says creature, it's actually an artifact.
Correct.
Now,
Yeah.
going to that, but let's talk about when that first clone came in. It copied a thing that was temporarily a creature.
Right.
It would only be a soul ring though for
Correct.
them.
Yes.
Even in that instant when the other thing was a
The
creature.
animated soul ring would be a legal choice for clone's replacement effect at that time. However, Karn Silver Golem's ability only turns it into a creature until end of turn. When that ability ended, then, well, the clone was coming in as a soul ring. The animated soul ring stopped being an animated soul ring. Therefore, there's no creatures in this example to choose.
Right.
Right.
So next up, and they'll get harder from here. True or false? At your opponent's end step, you have 2 life, a coercive recruiter, and a stunt double in hand. Coercive recruiter is a creature that says whenever it or another pirate enters the battlefield, you may essentially do a threaten effect. Gain control of and untap a creature. Stunt double is effectively clone with flash.
Right.
Okay.
So your opponent has a pirated copy of Sheodrid the Apocalypse. Pirated copy being a clone that says this is a clone, except it's also a pirate.
Okay.
Your opponent has a copy of pirated copy of Sheodrid the Apocalypse and a smug air of barely contained contempt. However, you know if you cast your stunt double on his end step and choose the pirated copy, you can turn the tables on him. Stunt double entering as the pirated copy of Sheoldred will trigger Coercive Recruiter, and with it, you can gain control of the pirated Sheoldred. This causes the legendary rule to put one of the Sheoldred into its owner's graveyard as a state-based action. You obviously choose his copy. Thus, when you draw, you gain 2 life and can attack with the pirated Sheoldred and the Recruiter without worrying about a Death Touch blocker. True or false?
So the Sheoldred that they have is a pirate one. Is that...
But the Coercive Recruiter is yours.
You have the Coercive Recruiter. You have the Stunt double in hand. They have a pirated copy which chose Sheoldred the Apocalypse when it entered.
False.
I'm going to say true.
This is actually true and an excellent turnabout.
Wait, can I try to guess why?
Sure.
Okay. So because the copy that the other person has is pirated on itself by it being a pirate itself, that doesn't make it a non-copyable ability because that creature is a creature type is copyable. And so what happens is when you cast your copy on it, because that Sheoldred is a pirate Sheoldred, you are then technically getting a pirate Sheoldred.
So does that mean if a card has something that permanently changes its power and toughness and you clone it, you get that card at its permanent?
We'll come back to that one. So
Was
you'll see that
close?
later. So you're basically correct, yes. Pirated copy has an exception to its clone ability. It says this is a copy of another creature on the battlefield, except it's a pirate.
And that's on the card itself.
Oh, so wait a minute. The Sheoldred was itself a clone.
No, the pirated copy is the clone. It had chosen Sheoldred.
Oh, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
I didn't realize that it was not the original Sheoldred that was made a pirate.
And it's a pirated copy of Sheoldred.
I understand. But
So,
anyway, yes, okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
fine.
Because-
I didn't, in my head, I did not understand it was a copy. So
Gotcha.
I gotcha.
Yeah, the crux of the issue is that because pirated copy has an exception to its copy ability, it copies it except in addition to its other types, it's a pirate.
Okay.
The resulting creature from that pirated copy is a Sheoldred who has the type pirate.
In my head, I was just thinking it's a Sheoldred that somehow got the pirate thing on it from something.
Yeah,
so I was like,
it's
oh, that's not copyable.
specifically pirated copy, which is the name of the card.
So also then, if you have a, I believe it's called Evil Twin,
Right.
that says it's a copy, but it has blah, blah, blah ability. If you copy that, you will get the full whatever it was copying plus the pay one and play a blue and a
and destroy a
black and
creature
destroy.
which shares a name with it.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
The issue that we're getting at here is some clones have additions or subtractions to their cloning ability.
Right.
Things like Vesuvan Doppelganger doesn't copy the color. Things like pirated copy is a pirate in addition to other types. Things like Stunt Double has flash in addition to its other abilities.
But it doesn't lose the flash when it becomes the other thing.
No. If something cloned with a Stunt Double is then further cloned by something else, it will have flash. It won't matter because flash only matters for cast restrictions and you've already cast it at that point.
Oh, okay.
But it will technically have the ability flash if another card cares about that.
Okay.
All right. So question 10, true or false? You and your opponent both have less than 20 life, but your opponent has the only creature, a Merit Lodge token. Merit Lodge, of course, is a 20/20 flying indestructible token created by Dark Depths. Your opponent attacks with his Merit Lodge token, but in response to declare attacks, you flash out a Stunt Double, copying it and later blocking. In his second main phase, your opponent casts Ether Snap to exile all tokens. Both the Merit Lodges are exiled. True or false?
False.
False.
Correct. His copy is a token, but tokens are only things not represented by cards. Token is not a copyable characteristic.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I
That
figured
makes
that,
sense.
but I had never heard that said out loud.
Right. Next question. You have cast Sea Dasher Octopus, a mutate blue card, for its mutate cost on top of your commander, Tatiova Benthic Druid. Tatiova's ability says whenever you landfall, you gain a life and draw card.
Yep.
I already know this is going to be hard because mutate is so complicated.
So the next thing you cast is a Progenitor Mimic. and when it enters, you choose your commander. The next turn, assuming you do not miss any triggers, how many cards do you draw when you play a land on your first main phase? And of course, Progenitor Mimic is a clone that makes a token clone of itself every upkeep.
Right. Okay. That's the blue-green guy, right?
Yep.
If I remember correctly. Kind of looks like a angel.
Blue-green 6-drop.
Yeah. 4 green blue. Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
So
I don't like this question at all.
I got it. Hold on.
How many cards does the original say it draws?
1 card per landfall.
So, and you're saying how many cards on your next landfall is assuming?
Yes. Assuming you don't miss any of your triggers, how many cards will you draw in response to playing a land on your next main phase?
All right. I think.
And you had the original mutated thing.
So, yes, your commander was the target of the mutate Sea Dasher Octopus. And the
doesn't it matter whether you put the octopus on the top or the bottom of that
Yes,
mutate?
it was put on top of your commander.
On
Yeah.
top of your
And what does the Sea Dasher Octopus do again?
Sea Dasher Octopus's mutate ability doesn't really matter.
Okay.
It gives an ability that says, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card.
So on top means that you get the abilities or you get the power toughness.
I know what it is.
That's my
I know
problem.
what it
Is
is.
I don't
So
remember
you would get
mutate.
if I recall
remember which
correctly,
one
what
does
mutate
which.
is, you would get 3 because you would make a copy of at the upkeep. So you'd have a second copy of your what's it called, the 6-drop you just mentioned.
Yeah, the progenitor.
So that means you would have 3 of your commander. You put 1 land out, 1, 2, 3.
I would say that that's right, assuming that means that the octopus only is the base creature and the abilities come from the bottom creature.
So it doesn't actually matter which order the creatures are for that purpose, but it does matter for your commander being legendary and
Correct.
the octopus not being legendary. And regardless of where the octopus is placed, top or bottom, it's still your commander. The pile is considered your commander in that
Correct.
instance.
Yeah.
Therefore, yes, Sloan, you're 100% there.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, the reason why I know is because when
I can't
mutate
believe I'm
came
getting
out.
schooled by Sloan. I'm now 2 behind.
That's right, baby. The reason why I know this is because when mutate came out, I thought it was a super cool ability, and I was like, "Oh man, I hope they keep making this because this could be really fun." And they haven't touched it since, which makes me very sad because I definitely think the idea for the ability is awesome.
I just think they didn't
and the way
pull it
it
off well.
works is the card that is on top is the face of the pile. And you get the abilities of every card underneath it.
Exactly so.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah, I tried to build some mutate decks, but there's just not enough good mutate.
Exactly, because I wanted to build one too, and there's just not enough of any one color where it's good enough to actually make it worthwhile. The only thing I could possibly think of that would make it worthwhile is if you just had a 5-color commander so you could do all of the mutates.
No, I mean, technically I am only 1 behind Sloan, but I am counting that last one wrong because I chose the wrong reason.
Okay. We got 2 questions left.
Okay,
All right. Question 12.
you get it.
You cast Quicksilver Gargantua, a clone that says it's a copy except it's a 7/7.
Okay.
When the Quicksilver Gargantuan resolves, the only creature on the battlefield is a sad Tomagoyf. There are only instants in both graveyards. What is the Gargantuan's power and toughness when it enters the battlefield?
7/7. I'm not.
What's
positive.
the
Remember-
Tormagoyf do?
Tomagoyf says its power is equal to the number of card types in graveyards, and its toughness is 1 plus the number of card types.
Oh.
So
So hold on, let me think. So because your guy says it's a 7/7, but the Termagoy says equal to the card types plus
You
1.
could seal it if you get this one different from me and get it right.
I'm trying to think though, because there's a weird thing about the layers, and I'm trying to remember because layers go in priority from 1 to 7, and so depending on what layer this is depends on my answer.
it's not a layers question.
It's not. I
It's
thought
not.
it was.
You shouldn't have given that.
Oh, I thought it was a layer because I
You
thought it
think
was about the
that's
layers.
I informally protest.
I'm gonna say. I'm actually gonna say its toughness is 8. It's a 7/8.
So you think it's a 7/8?
Yeah.
You would be mistaken. You were correct. It's a 7/7. So
Because
I
it's
withdraw my protest.
in this particular instance, because of the way clones work, because the power and toughness is an exception to the clone, it actually omits the characteristic defining ability from the Tamagotchi.
Okay. See, that was my
It
only
doesn't
hesitation.
even have that line of text.
I was thinking that would be a silly thing to clone, except it was the only target.
Right.
But it would always be a 7/7, even if there was a million things in the graveyard types. You know?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether
That was the only thing I was
whether
thinking of. I
everything
was
was
like-
there and it's a 6/7 Tamagotchi, or if it just has nothing, empty graveyard, and it is a 0/1. But yes, the gargantuan is always a 7/7 regardless.
Okay.
All right. This next one is the hardest question I have.
Is it the last question?
It is the last
So it comes down to this. If I don't beat Sloan on this one,
Oh, man, prepare to be
beats me.
disappointed.
All right. You have a Zoetic Cavern you've played. Zoetic Cavern is a land with morph. You played it face down. You cast Mirror Weave, targeting...
well, not targeting.
yeah. Well, Mirror Weave targets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Mirror Weave targets. Because it's a enchantment, 1 blue.
You cast Mirror Weave, targeting a pirated copy of a Gideon Jura, which is not legendary, currently animated as a creature. What the heck does the poor, confused Zoetic Cavern become?
Okay, so you have Zoetic Cavern that has morph, but it's face down.
Yes, it is been cast as a 3-mana 2/2.
And
then
when you
what was
flip it, it clones. Is that what happens?
When you flip Zoetic Cavern, it becomes a land.
Oh, okay.
Then the thing that the Mirror Weave comes in as, you said it's target.
Mirror Weave is not a clone creature.
Right.
Mirror Weave is an instant that says all creatures on the battlefield become a copy of target creature.
Okay.
So you
And
are targeting the.
You are targeting the pirated copy of an animated, non-legendary Gideon Jura.
And Gideon Jor is a planeswalker.
Gideon Jura is the original Gideon Planeswalker from Mirrodin.
I have this one. I'm going to stop answering first. Sloan is going to go first, but I know the answer.
Okay.
So all
We need the
creatures-
Jeopardy music playing
All
in the
creatures
background.
become a copy.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, closer.
I would. Oh, man, I'm trying to, because I'm stuck between two things we talked about earlier. So I'm trying to figure out the way it would work. So,
I think we're going to put a 30-second timer on this.
oh, geez, Louise, you're so mean. Okay, I'm trying to think. So it would come in and copy. I would say, because it's a creature, the face down land,
Mm-hmm.
the Gideon Jura, and you're targeting the Gideon Jura, you said, the pirated Gideon Jura.
Yes, it is a Gideon Jura, which has had its legendary super type removed and has gained the pirate subtype from pirated copy and has been animated by his loyalty ability.
Are you targeting the pirated copy version?
Yeah,
or
that's what he's
yes.
saying. Yes.
Okay.
It is a pirated...
Then
yes.
the other creatures would become a copy of Gideon Joran,
Okay.
is what I'm going to say.
Animated or not? And
not
as a
animated.
pirate or not?
Non-animated, I would say.
A non
And is it a pirate?
Because you're targeting the pirated copy, yes.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would say it is a non-animated pirate copy as well.
So
Oh, I think we both got
you
it wrong.
would both be wrong. So it will come into play as a colorless, subtypeless, nameless 2/2 creature that cannot morph as a special action.
Yeah, I was way off. Yeah.
So the weird thing about face down creatures is they're always 2/2, colorless, typeless, nameless,
So if there was a bunch
even
of
if they're clones.
if there was a bunch of morphed creatures out and anything, and you do mirror weave, the morphs don't change at all.
the morphs just don't.
But are they a legal target for mirror weaves, and then that thing has to become a morphed creature?
So
a 2/2 creature with
the reason why Gideon had to be non-legendary is because Mirror Weave says non-legendary.
Right. Yeah.
But aside from that, yeah, they would not be pirates. They would not be. They would technically be Gideon Juras. They would not be, or they would not be animated from his ability, but they would still be 2/2s because the face down rules override the clone rules.
wow.
Yeah, that was
a complicated one.
that was my hardest question. You guys did really well.
Dang it.
Yes, Sloan still beat me,
Yeah.
but we both ended on a downer. But that was a super hard question. That was
Yeah. Talk about the intricacies of cloning. That last one definitely topped.
yeah. So I mean, clones are very cool. I mean, they can do some
Right.
really cool things, especially when you get into, and it also gains this ability.
Right.
And mutate definitely throws some fun in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love clones, but I like that. That was a great one. Do you have any last things you need to say about clone, or did that pretty much cover?
I do have one thought on clones that I didn't cover that I would like to point out. When you're evaluating a clone card for its strength, its utility, we prefer clones that target anything, not just things you control, because of the prevalence of legendaries, especially in Commander. A clone that can only target things you control are going to run afoul of the legendary rule much more often than clones that can target anything on the battlefield. Because if you clone your opponent's legendary, well, then, neither care about each other's uniqueness.
Right.
But if you if you choose your own legendary object, you're going to have to put one of them in the graveyard as a state-based action. So keep that in mind and take careful attention to if the clone is a object you control versus on the battlefield.
Right. No, that's a good point. I love clones. They're so much fun.
They are fun indeed.
So I think that's more the main topic, but let's talk about what we were going to have be the main topic, because I don't think this one's quite as in depth as that, but just kind of, I thought this was important when playing with multiple pods. So, Sloan, Jeff, and I play with our friend David at times, or maybe just the three of us. And then I also have a secondary pod where I play with Andrew and Lizard and Chris, and then we have some other motley crew that kind of come in and out. But how do you deal? And then we also play at a shop where sometimes we sit with other people that we don't normally play with. So how do you each deal with playing in multiple pods with multiple power levels and being flexible to be able to fit in?
I mean, the easiest way for me is I just have multiple different decks that I feel like that are at different levels of competitiveness. So I have a deck, my Calamax deck, which I would consider very high power. It's very quick, can usually win between turns like 3 and 6 fairly quickly. I have a Prosper deck that's a little bit slower, but still more strong. And then it kind of just goes down from there. One of my favorite decks that isn't like super powerful in my mind, but is just super fun is my Arkelos deck. Just everything comes in tapped, which is hysterical to me. And then I also have decks that are, they kind of blend in and out between being more spell leaving or being more creature based or kind of. So what I do is, luckily I've been fortunate enough I collect a lot for a long time. So I just have the ability of having multiple different decks I can pull out and kind of based off of what I'm seeing, I can kind of guesstimate what deck would work well with the people I'm sitting down with.
Now, Andrew, I know you and I have the unique experience of our main group we play with is pretty high level, like just either CEDH or maybe one tick below.
Yeah, we're definitely straddling that line between high power and CDH.
And the general populace of the shop we play at Mystic Forge is pretty lower level or mid tier, I'd call it.
I would say upper mid,
to
be completely honest.
So how do you manage playing at either table?
Like Sloan, I throw the kitchen sink at it. I'm an incredibly enfranchised player. I've been playing for forever, decades at this point. I've been trying to optimize my collection since I became a primary commander player to have a comprehensive tool set for the EDH format. So yeah, I just have a lot of decks. And I have decks built at multiple power levels. And sometimes I have a precon lying around just in case.
Right.
Right.
My typical loadout going to my shop, something like 20 decks.
Right. And I carry 3 times, but you don't see most of them because
Right.
I have a whole 5. I have a card box that holds 5 decks, and that one I have my lower power.
Right.
Like, no 0-drop mana rocks, not a lot of fast mana, no searching, no tutors. And I don't pull those out a lot. They're fun decks. One of them's just slightly modified Nagathrod, the mill pirate. But I also, the other thing I will do, so I also have a clone deck, which really the power level is based on what the power level table is.
Yeah,
If I only have mid-tier things to copy, that's what my deck is. So that helps. And then the other thing I will do, though, if I have a deck that I want to play, a lot of times self-control can be a thing I use. Sure, I have a win con in my hand. I could combo out. Maybe it's Thassa's Oracle. I'm not going to play it in this pod. That would be really unfair for me to play a Thassa's Oracle and I know that's a bugaboo of yours, Andrew, that when somebody could, when they don't.
Yeah.
But it's not fair
So-
to pull out if we were playing at that mid-tier. And in fact, let's go one step further. Like I said, there's a group of players that play at our shop who one of them once said, "What's a dockside?" I would never play Thassa's Oracle at that table.
So I typically, my personal opinion is that you should always play your deck optimally, and it's selling yourself and your opponent short if you don't play it to the best of your ability. Therefore, in my worldview, you need to have a deck that, when played optimally, is going to be a good challenge without being overpowering for your opponent. Ultimately, we want to have fun, and I know there's some people who disagree, but I don't think pub stomping people is fun.
Right.
I want to have that drama of my opponent having a realistic chance of defeating me, regardless of their skill level.
Well, but I'm just saying, it's not like I say, "Oh, I could win right now, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let them play for a little while." I just won't play the instant combo wins, and I won't play searches if I have them in hand. Maybe if I'm searching for a mana rocket versus a win con, I might do that. But I just choose not to play those certain cards. Otherwise, I do play my deck optimally. I'm trying to win. I just kind of handicap myself a level if I feel like the deck I'm playing doesn't match fairly with what they're playing.
What I would prefer, rather than if I were not such a heavily enfranchised player and didn't have the opportunity, either through budgetary restraint or through time restraint, because some people just don't have time to build 20 decks.
Right.
If I couldn't do that, then I think the next best option would be to have a power down sideboard.
Right, which we've talked about before, is that's a way that if you only have one deck, have 20 to 30 cards that you can just kind of change in and out.
20 to 30 is probably more than is necessary.
Right.
I think you can power down most decks by taking out something like 5 key pieces. You take out a couple of things in a way that doesn't fully cripple the deck, but definitely pushes it back a step or two. I think you can make most decks weak enough to at least go down a tier. Like a CEDH deck can be reduced to a high power to a mid, something to that effect.
Well, and that was my point with like the 20 to 30 cards. Let's say you only have one deck, but you could have like 20 to 30 cards. Let's say it's a CDH deck, your main deck, where you're going to play with people that would be more considered lower mid tier. Well, taking out just 5 pieces may not do it, but if I exchange like maybe these 10 cards,
What he's
I
saying
have
is
these-
if you go from a super high level.
yeah, it gives you
the
the
next one down,
variety
you
that
only
this
need to
deck
take out
I
a few.
can, with these 20 to 30 cards, I can make this go from CDH to this deck has no way to actually win. It's just here to fill a hole. like with those 20 to 30 cards, you have this flexibility of, okay, if I take these ones out and add these ones in, it kind of puts it closer to here, and it allows people to customize their deck, like you're saying, to their play group, but in a more specific way. Because
In a broader way.
in a broader way, yeah, it allows them, because I have this one deck, but I have these 20 to 30 side cards. So depending on which ones I take out and put in, it can go from CDH to maybe high power to then mid tier to then low mid tier to then whatever. And so that is one thing we talked about with people that are potentially on budgetary restrictions or time restrictions, is that's a good way for you to be able to play a lot of decks with your one deck.
Well, and to be clear, when I say that, like, I'll do that I'll play a deck and not, usually it's because either I want to show them a cool deck that I have that they may not have seen before, but it wouldn't be fair to play it at its full power level. Or they asked to see a deck. I've had that before. Oh, I heard you have a can't be countered deck. Can I see that? Yeah, you can see it, but I'm not going to like play that against your precon at its full potential.
The other thing you could potentially do is just warn the table. Hey guys, I don't really have a deck that I think is fair against the decks that you're bringing to the table. Why don't you all consider me the arch enemy for this game? Everybody defeat me together and you will all win together.
That's a good way to do it too. I like that.
Yeah, arch enemy. Yeah.
I mean, that's how Andrew plays every game.
I mean,
whether
that
he
doesn't
agrees to
really
it or not,
change anything for me, but I look very magnanimous.
Well, no,
when I
it
say
does
that.
though, because the new players, if they haven't read our poster at our local shop, may not understand what they have just gotten themselves into.
If I could have a nickel for every person at pre-release who did a double take, seeing that poster you put on the wall, like, are you him? Like, yes, that's me.
I think I need to get some proxies of that made, because when I go to MagicCon in Vegas, I think I want to hand those out so that the whole world knows exactly who to look for as far as Andrew goes.
You see this guy, get him.
Yeah, just kill him. Kill him
But
first.
Yeah.
well, I think those are all good ways to handle kind of multi-pod environments. And like I said, I do have multiple power levels. Like I said, I usually have 40 decks plus with me. Most of them I don't pull out. They're just there in case there's a situation where I run into a pod that may not match something that I normally play. But kind of going with that, Sloan, you had some kind of tips for the newer players.
Yeah, so if you're a newer player and you're just trying to figure out like how would I figure out how people are playing in this pod, or what's a way to do it, there's a couple of things that you can either ask or even just watch a game and see how people play and how they interact with their cards. So the first question would always be, usually when are people winning when you guys are playing? Like, what turn are the games going till on average? Because you'll find out that some pods are like, oh, we win usually around turn 6 or 7, and you'll get another pod, they're like, oh, it's usually like 12 or 14. It's like, okay, well, those are probably two completely different levels of decks that you're about to step into.
Here's the further problem to that question, though, is that it matters still what the decks are and the power level of the players. Because if you take Andrew and my core play group, which you've played with many times, and you bring our deck to another table, we're probably going to win by turn 4 or 5, maybe 6 at the most, pretty regularly.
Depending on how much interaction we suffer on the way.
Right. But in our group, there is so much interaction and so much back and forth. We usually don't end our games that quick. It's usually much closer to 10, 12, 13.
Yeah.
Remember, kids, bring your spanners to the works. If your opponent isn't winning, you get another chance.
Yeah.
And another thing too is, kind of just asking like, what kind of commanders is everyone playing? Like, what's the theme of your deck? If someone's pulling out an Dragon, they're like, yeah, I just play big stompy dragons and this is what I do. And another guy is like, oh, I'm a token generator and I'm playing Reese the Redeemed and I have all of the token doubling stuff in there. And it's, so that giving you idea of just asking people what kind of commander, what's their commander and what's the theme of the deck is a good way to also kind of gauge an idea of what that pod is doing and how they're playing.
Oh, I'm playing Urza and I try and win by turn 3.
Yeah,
but it's not competitive.
You're gonna run into some people though whose decks are relatively easy to stymie if you know the pain points.
Right.
So if you know what to look for, the deck will just fall apart. And those people are going to be very hesitant to give you a detailed rundown on what their deck's game plan is. Because if you know, the deck's not going to work.
Right.
Well,
you're going to get pushback.
I would
from people
even
like
say that I don't even want a detailed plan. I would just say, for example, if someone sat down and they said, hey, you're playing Calamax, what does your deck do? I'm like, I'm basically just trying to copy instant spells.
Calamax things.
Right. And then someone sits down and they see my turtle, Arkelos, they're like, oh, what does this deck do? I'm like, I'm just making everything that you control come in tapped. That's it.
And my stuff come in
And
untapped.
all my stuff comes in untapped. I'm not going to tell them, here's how I win. If you see these cards, destroy them. But What I am going to tell you is that basically the point of this deck is all my stuff comes in untapped. All your stuff is going to come in tapped, and that's the theme. And so I think being able to theme your deck is important, as especially more veteran players, to help newer players coming into the game to learn, but also for getting into pods, being able to explain the theme of your deck without tilting your hand or tipping your hand, as it were, is important. And I think that's a good way to understand what kind of pod you're getting into, is just seeing that. And then also, like I said lastly, kind of watching. If you're walking up to a table and you just kind of watching, the game can tell you too what kind of pod they're playing as, you know.
Right.
The other thing you have to keep in mind when you're talking about how quickly can your deck win if you're not sabotaged is that there's a difference between high-level decks that win as quickly as possible and decks that put everyone in a prison. You have those stacks that, I win on like turn 20 or something, but you're not going to do anything after turn 2.
Yeah.
Right.
You're effectively shut down to one spell per turn if you're lucky.
You're going to draw a card, stare mournfully at your hand, discard that card, and pass.
Blizzard.
Right. Yeah.
So the trickiness of even the most obvious measures of power level, there's exceptions to a lot of this stuff. There's a reason why the power level conversation continues to bedevil the Commander community.
Right.
Now, what are we, 15 years into Commander?
Yeah.
And you have, in addition to how quickly can you win, you have the consistency of your deck. How often will you have the tools you need to win? How much redundancy do you have? How difficult is it to interact with your key pieces? Like one of the reasons why Thassa's Oracle is such a prevalent thing in higher level games is not only is it low mana, it's also really hard to deal with its trigger.
Right.
And
No, it's not Stifle.
Yes, but who plays Stifle?
Raising my hand. Raising both hands.
Says the blue player.
So, some of this is, of course, meta dependent, and
Yeah.
I will defer to the greater CDH community, which has decided Stifle is insufficiently useful to justify its slot, despite its being a basically silver bullet to one of the most common win cons.
Right.
To many, many win cons, I believe.
Yeah, I mean that's true.
I mean, to me, I've started playing more, not less. They've come out with a lot of cards that have that ability. I love that ability.
It's also the
You stifle somebody's fetch land when they're trying to.
Oh, God.
Oh my word! It's so much fun.
Turn 1, stifle that fetch. Oh, the pain, the salt.
It's
Yeah.
almost like he's felt it before.
Yeah.
Oh, I felt it in my soul.
But no, I mean, it's really hard. You really cannot gauge fully until you
Right.
play in the group.
Until you've played a couple
the
of games.
whole thing we've talked about how trying to assign a power level number to a deck, you can't accurately do that. There's so much to it. We've talked about before. We were talking about before the show. Who's playing the deck changes the power of the deck.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Andrew playing anything, it's CEDH.
Yeah, the running gag is if I pick up a precon, it's CDH.
Yeah. But Andrew knows how to run a deck. He knows what most cards do, at least if he reads them, even if he's never seen them before. He knows the rules really well.
True.
When he looks at a card, it's like a beautiful mind scene going on in his head. He's like, how can I break this?
Yeah.
The level of complexity you have is very related to the ceiling of power on a card. And precons have become quite a bit more complex in the last several years. You can squeeze a lot of power out of them if you know just how to do it. But a lot of it comes down to a pretty comprehensive knowledge of other people's decks and strategies. If you know what an average Calamax deck is going to try to do, how it's going to try to do it, you can get a lot more mileage out of the removal you have, even in a precon,
Right.
than you can if you come into it blind and are just reacting to whatever the splashiest thing that seems to be happening.
Right. So, I mean, that's the thing. You can't quantify somebody's knowledge and playability while talking about a power level of the deck. You can't talk about their strategy they use with the same cards versus somebody else. It's all going to be very dependent, and a lot of it comes down to luck and how good your hand is when you draw. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. So, asking questions, but playing is the best you can do. Ask the most questions you can.
Right.
Get as much information as you can. Don't beat it to death. Don't sit there for an hour grilling them about how they play.
Yeah, it's not a resume.
Ask a few questions to give you an idea. If you can watch them play around, and then kind of go from there. And you're just going to have to kind of see how it goes.
Yeah.
And if you have a situation where you feel out of your depth, either you're handily stomping the table or you're just getting manhandled at every instance, see if you can find a different pod. Sometimes the best answer to a mismatched power level is to find a different pod.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
not
if you go to a
everyone has
local
that
game
luxury,
shop,
but-
if you go to a local game shop, though, you usually find at least a couple. And if not on the night you're there, ask when most players play.
Right.
But I think that's a good topic. I think it's hard sometimes meshing in with a new pod and trying to figure out what power level,
Yeah.
try to figure out how a deck to play. You'll get there, just trial and error, and just you all have to be willing to be like, well, okay, that didn't work. That deck was way too powerful. Let me try
Right.
something else. So.
Rule zero conversations continue to be one of the hardest parts of EDH.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let's go wrap it up for today. Thanks everybody for listening. I want to thank Jack May at Info Programs as always. A special thanks to Andrew for joining us today. He will be with us next episode, so tune in next week.
Yeah.
You can hear more of Andrew, where we're going to grill him on some judgy questions, some things that might be questions that our listeners have as to how things work. If you want to get in contact with us, you can email us at cast@commanderspod.com. You can check out our website at commanderspod.com. You can join us on our Patreon at patreon.com/commanderspod. We'd really appreciate it. Don't forget to check out our YouTube videos. We have some box openings on there.
Yep.
You may have noticed a new intro song today for this episode. We're very excited about this. So at the end of this, you can actually hear the full song. We're not going to put the full song because it's a 3-minute song on every episode. But our patrons will have that able to be downloaded. So that's another perk that they'll get.
Nice.
But so thank you, Andrew, again. And we'll talk to you guys next time. But don't forget, people, he's shown you why. Please kill Andrew first.
If you can.
Gather around the table, friends, it's time to shuffle up. With Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan, let's fill our cups. Commander decks in hand, the battle's about to start. A podcast for the legends, where magic meets the heart. Commander's Pod, where the stories unfold. With heroes and villains, new and old. Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan guide the way. In the world of EDH we play. Whoa. Strategies and combos, deck techs and lore. From the first draw to the final score. Legendary creatures and spells that amaze. In the Commander's Pod we set the blaze. Commander's Pod, where the stories unfold. With heroes and villains, new and old. Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan guide the way. In the world of EDH we play. Strategies and combos, deck techs and lore. From the first draw to the final score. Legendary creatures and spells that amaze. In the Commander's Pod we set the blaze. Whoa. Commander's Pod, where the stories unfold. With heroes and villains, new and old. Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan guide the way. In the world of EDH we play. Tragic miracles and epic wins. Through thick and thin, the fun begins. Discussing themes and brewing dreams. In this podcast we're a team. We play. Native ships and bannings, cards that break the mold. From the casual nights to the tales of old. Every episode a journey in this magic land. With Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan will take a stand. Commander's Pod, where the stories unfold. With heroes and villains, new and old. Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan guide the way. In the world of EDH we play. So tune in, friends, let's draw and go. In the Commander's Pod the love will show. From our decks to yours, we share the spark. In this world of magic we'll leave a mark.